Hello.
Hey there. How are you?
Woohoo, here we go, huh?
Oh my God. Yeah, no, it's been good. Thankfully, everybody's been pretty good about, like, there was only a handful of last minute registrations and, oh, gotta leave that on, and different system this year for me. So it makes it easier. I'm gonna put into the chat right now. Hang out. I'm gonna block this for a second.
I did touch base with Lisa, by the way, so we're all good.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. Okay. And type message here. Everyone who applied for CEs.
I'm telling people about the CE stuff and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So remind people too.
Okay. Yeah. And so we have, if you saw from
Yep.
what I just put up, so that should be good. And then I have your other one for later. And then what I'm going to do is I have 2 different links that have to be sent for the surveys, which
Yeah.
you can mention in your notes. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to email it to everyone after.
Yeah, I did. I'm going to mention that. Also, you don't have to send it by the email that you were going to send it by. You can actually invite them directly from the Google form.
Okay.
I can show you how to do that. You just copy and paste the addresses into that, and then when it shows up, it'll show up in the body of the email.
Oh, okay.
So it might be easier for people.
Yeah. Okay.
If you can separate people into the social workers, but that's easy because you'll have that information.
I'll have the info. Yeah. So that shouldn't be too hard. And it's just this same email, different link, to each of them. Yeah. So not too hard.
I'll share it after. I figured I'm not going to tell you how to do that now. You have enough stuff.
No, like, fine. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then, okay, we got 24 people on. So this is good.
People rolling in. So how many ultimately?
I don't even have the title number. It was almost 130.
Wow.
Yeah. So if everybody, if you lose 10%, you figure we'll have like 100 or so. Mm-hmm. So, which is good.
That's great.
And then, okay, I'm just, when we're ready to go, it's early yet, which is good. When we're ready to go, then I'll mute myself and stop my video. So then it'll just be you. We got about 20 minutes, which is great because I want to give it, at least till 10:10, or do we have to do something to record attendance?
Yeah.
Please see the above link. There we go.
Yeah, and I mentioned that too, and I mentioned the evaluations, like everything, to make sure that they.
Yeah, and what I'm going to do is I'll follow the chat, and I don't want to have the Q&A on too, because then
I'll follow the Q&A, and Lisa's actually going to get on 15 minutes earlier than the return for the Q&A to also type some responses. So.
Okay, good. Yeah, because then when she comes in, she'll come right on the screen. She'll be able to. Well, she can come in behind the scenes, and then and then when I stop the video, then you guys will both show up.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So we should be doing okay. That's about it. I'm much calmer than last year.
Yeah. I'm old hat now. Now you got this.
Yeah, I think I decided, I was looking at jobs and I'm like, maybe I can sell this as a side gig.
People that do that, they facilitate events. Yep.
So I was laughing because I'm like, just one more thing. I know you responded, but I don't see anything in the chat box. Do I have to look somewhere else? Oh my God, these people are crazy. I'm sorry.
You just have to paste it again. You might.
I just did. I just sent it in.
You know why? Because it's just to panelists that you sent. It's not to everyone. They can't see it. You have to select panelists and attendees.
Oh, so
as your audience. You're sending a private chat just to us.
Oh, got it. Okay, got it. Okay. So how do I change that now?
You see, it says 2, and then there's a little blue drop down that says panelists. You have to drag
Yes.
that, click on it.
Okay,
Drag-
got it.
Yeah, select panelists and attendees.
Select all. No,
It says panelists and attendees.
it just says all panelists.
Oh, see, I have access to both. I can do that. I mean, I can.
Okay, go ahead. I'm gonna let you do it then.
Yeah.
For some reason, I'm only seeing from me to all panelists. That's weird.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I don't know why.
Oh, shoot.
Maybe because I'm the host.
Oh, I pasted the wrong thing. Darn.
Oh, yeah, you have all panelists and attendees. Here, I just changed it. Oh, under the 2. Oh, I'm so sorry, Marla. Here, did you were you able to send it? Yeah, you did. Okay.
Although, you know, everybody seems to be.
There's only panelists for you and Lisa. Like in terms of this, like I have
The default seems to be to panelists only.
yeah. But I just changed the 2, and then Sylvina got it. Okay, yeah. Sylvina's a lovely lady with a pain in the ass. So
I made a mistake and I had deleted, I mean, I had posted some times to that I had sent to Lisa earlier.
I just realized what you were talking about on the 2 at the bottom. I see it now. So when I go to the next one, we're fine. So when I respond to anything here, now it's to all.
Okay. I'm gonna be monitoring the Q&A the whole time, so I probably won't be following along the chat.
Should we tell Alan no worries?
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm waiting. Hey, all choose attendees on the 2. Should I do that?
Kind
of doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I posted the sign in.
Yeah, it's working.
Unknown caller.
Dear God.
Get out myself here.
My pharmacy. But everyone is singing work well. The signing work well.
You want to post the schedule again? Or?
Yeah, I was going to say conference begins at 10:15 a.m.
It might be a few minutes earlier. I think I only have about 7 or 8 minutes to say.
Where are we at with people? All right, we're at 69. You want to say 10:10?
Right, yeah.
Session 1.
Is there a waiting room? Are you able, or are people able to?
I'm able to see the panelists. No, what happens is there's no waiting room in the webinar, but right now we have 72 participants are here.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and they may be seeing us. I don't know. You know, so they may be seeing us. Okay, great. Hi all.
Hi, Mike.
We are waiting for more people to join us. Hi, everybody. Stacy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 21st Annual OCD New Jersey Conference. I'm Dr. Marla Deibler, I'm President of OCD New Jersey, licensed clinical psychologist, and founder and executive director of the Center for Emotional Health of Greater Philadelphia. I'm so glad you're joining us today for what promises to be a wonderful day of learning, and I'd like to extend to you a warm welcome. Through virtual learning, we're able to reach not only those in our tri-state area, but also to those in places as far as Canada, Mexico, and Kuwait this year. So welcome. Before we get started, I have a few things I'd like to share. First, I'd like to acknowledge the members of OCD New Jersey's dedicated board of directors. This team of volunteers spends their time facilitating all of our activities year-round. Our immediate past president, Dr. Alan Wegg, our vice president, Dr. Jordan Levy, our secretary, Dr. Rachel Stroll, our treasurer, Dr. Rob Zambrano, and last but certainly not least, our program coordinator, Ms. Nicole Torella, without whom our annual conference would certainly not be possible. We're also grateful to Wilhelm Engelbrecht of IOCDF for supporting Ms. Torella in facilitating our online programming. Thank you so much. For those of you who aren't familiar with our parent organization, OCDNJ is the New Jersey affiliate of the International OCD Foundation, the IOCDF. ICDF has over 20 affiliates and over 10,000 members worldwide. Its mission is to increase access to effective treatment through research and training, fostering a hopeful and supportive community for those affected by OCD and related disorders and the professionals who treat them, and to fight the stigma surrounding mental health issues. They host conferences and other virtual events, offer a treatment provider database, and a wealth of information and resources on their website at iocdf.org. OCD New Jersey is made possible by the support of IOCDF. OCD New Jersey has no membership dues, but we receive funding assistance from IOCDF based on their membership's geography, so please consider joining their organization. If you like what you see here today, you can learn more about IOCDF and OCD New Jersey at OCDNJ.org and sign up for our e-newsletter. You can also follow us on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hold events throughout the year and engage in outreach activities to support OCD and related disorder community members. If you'd like to volunteer or help out, please do let us know. We really appreciate those interested in volunteering to assist us in our mission as we grow into our ever-expanding online community. As for our events today, if you are a member of the professional community and you've registered for continuing education, please remember to sign in this morning and sign out at the end of the day. That is required in order to receive your credits. These forms are quick Google form links that will be made available in the chat, so please check the chat and sign in and sign out. You'll be required to complete an evaluation form as well following the conference. These evaluation forms will be emailed to you following the conference. Please complete the evaluations in order to receive your CE credits. The certificates of completion will be mailed out within a week of the conference. Our keynote address will begin in just a few minutes. During the presentation, if you have any questions for Dr. Coyne, please enter those questions in the Q&A link at the bottom. The chat feed can be used for general discussion. The first half of the presentation will continue until 11:45 a.m., at which time Dr. Coyne will discuss questions on screen that arise. We'll break from 12 to 12:30 for lunch, and then please rejoin us with the session 2 link that was sent to you as we approach 12:30. The second half of Dr. Coyne's presentation will continue from 12:30 until 1:45, at which time she'll discuss questions again until 2. We then invite you to join our last session of the day, the Living with OCD panel discussion, through the session 3 link that was sent to you. This year, we have 6 members of the OCD community who will share their wide range of experience with OCD and related disorders. I'll be moderating that panel and also providing with clinical insights. I invite you to share your questions again in the Q&A for discussion throughout the presentation, including the panel. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our invited guest today, Dr. Lisa Coyne. Dr. Coyne is the founder and senior clinical consultant of the McLean OCD Institute for Children and Adolescents at McLean Hospital and is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. She's the founder and executive director of the New England Center for OCD and Anxiety and was elected as president of the Association of Contextual Behavioral Science. She's a member of the Clinical and Scientific Advisory Board and is on the faculty and of the Behavior Therapy Training Institute of the International OCD Foundation. She's also a licensed psychologist, a peer-reviewed ACT trainer, and author. She's authored multiple articles and chapters on ACT with children and adolescents and is the co-author of the books Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, The Clinician's Guide for Supporting Parents, and The Joy of Parenting. Her new books, Stuff That's Loud, A Teen's Guide to Unspiraling When OCD Gets Noisy, Stop Avoiding Stuff, 25 Micro Skills to Face Your Fears and Do It Anyway, were published in 2020. And now, let's begin. No. Does it say your computer? Oh, have sound now. Someone else hears it, but I don't. That's weird. Yeah, but that doesn't make sense. I should still hear you through my computer.
Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Lisa Coyne, and I am the director of the New England Center for OCD and Anxiety. I'm really happy to be with you all today. I grew up in New Jersey, so it's really nice to be coming back to be with you, even if it's just virtual today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And the title of our talk today is Fear and Flexibility, and we're going to be talking about how to integrate acceptance and commitment therapy into traditional exposure and response prevention therapy. And we're going to talk about this in terms of how to best shape bravery-based behavior in people of all ages, with some attention to children and adolescents. Okay. So after this presentation, we have a number of learning objectives today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between ACT, which is of course an exposure-based treatment itself, and how we might think about how to talk about and how to think about and how to conceptualize exposure from that perspective, as opposed to a traditional habituation paradigm. We're going to talk about how to give rationales for engagement in exposure-based work based on the principles of a psychological flexibility approach. We're going to talk about the importance of developing a therapeutic relationship and a working task agreement and alliance with clients that's around acceptance, values, and compassion when we're doing composure-based treatment. We're going to talk a lot about inhibitory learning as we go, and how using principles that ACT is founded on can really help support inhibitory learning. And then we're going to talk about values-based exposures. Okay, so hopefully there'll be something that you can use directly in your practice, whether you are a person who really likes ACT and you want to do more of it more consistently with an ERP paradigm, or if you're a very traditional behavior therapist and you do ERP, how might you harness some of the motivational elements of ACT to really empower your practice of ERP? So we'll get moving on. Okay, so for point one, we're going to talk about how do we think about exposure from an ACT-based paradigm. And I thought, just to kick this off, I would tell you a little story about how I learned some differences and some things that really helped direct my own practice of exposure and response prevention. So several years ago, I went trekking in Nepal in the Himalayas, and that little, peak here and that you're looking at, the little gray peak with the cloud on top of it, that's Mount Everest. And I trekked to Everest Base Camp with my daughter. And it was a really, really amazing trip. It was her graduation year from high school, and I wanted to take her there to show her that, you could do anything you want with a little bit of grit and with a little bit of perseverance. So I did not think about this, but of course, I have a fear of heights. And I somehow did not think that this would come into play, but I found myself on quite a lot of really narrow paths at the edges of cliffs where there's sheer wall up against you, and then there's like a sheer drop of thousands of feet on the other side of you. And a lot of these are rocky and narrow and steep, and it was pretty scary. And I thought, well, great, I'm an exposure therapist. I'm going to do the thing. I'm just going to go, and I'm going to face my fear, and I'm going to get my butt up this mountain. And after a while, I realized that despite actually doing the exposure of walking on these narrow paths, I wasn't feeling any different. It was still just as scary. And I wasn't making any real progress with the transformation of my relationship to the fear. So I thought, well, crap. And I realized I was doing what we teach the people that we work with to not do during exposure, right? I was covertly avoiding in all sorts of ways, otherwise known as white knuckling. And so I had to kind of break down for myself, like, well, what am I doing in this moment that is protecting me from really learning that I can, move forward and that the sphere is not going to get in my way. And I noticed what I was doing visually. I was looking just at the patch of earth right in front of my feet. So I thought, okay, I gotta look over the edge. And then I thought, I'm going really fast, as fast as I can over the really narrow parts, the steep parts. And I thought, all right, I got to slow down. And actually what was really scary was stopping, because I felt somehow that it was somehow scarier just to stand, because I felt like I could fall over at any point or lose my balance. All sorts of things happen when you're really scared, right? But the other thing that I thought was really important was I wasn't asking for help at all, and I wasn't letting anyone know how scared I was. And I thought, all right, we're going to actually disclose and we're going to actually, get a little help over the really dangerous parts, which I did. And then finally, I realized that I could either make this trip about fear, or I could do what I came to do while I was in the mountains, which was really appreciate how magnificent they were and what a once in a lifetime experience this was with my daughter, right? On the year of her graduation from high school. And my goal was to show her she could do anything, right? And so there was another move, right? Not just breaking down the covert avoidance, but placing the actions that I was taking in the context of this bigger, way more important thing, right? And those were the things that got me the space. And that, right, all of those little pieces, all of those little behaviors are what I want to teach you guys today and how to approach your ERP. All right. So, no idea where the words are on this slide, but I'm assuming most of you are very well versed with OCD. So we won't spend tons of time here, but OCD always has a private event, right? And when I say private event, what I mean is a recurrent intrusive thought, a sensation of incompleteness, a sensation of not just rightness, sensation of existential fear. It can be whatever the private psychological event is that occurs inside one's skin. And then a compensatory behavior, a ritual, or a compulsion that one does to mitigate that fear, to get some relief from that fear. And whether those are overt and observable, or whether they are covert, for example, worry, rumination, or other kinds of cognitive rituals, right? It always has these two pieces. And one thing I'd like to dispel really quickly is that I keep hearing that, and I'm not sure where this is coming from, that ACT doesn't address cognitive rituals as rituals because they're thoughts. That's incorrect. Of course we do, because ACT is based on applied behavior analysis. And so we always think about behaviors in terms of function. So just to kind of clear that up. So two pieces. And of course, when we have these two pieces together and they cause a significant experience of functional impairment or distress greater than an hour a day, we have some clinically meaningful OCD, right? And I mentioned function. So we really do, and I'm going to encourage you, no matter what your approach is to OCD, if it's straight up ERP or if it's more OCD, we really want to think about it in terms of function. In other words, how behaviors work. So we have a scary or unwanted private event, maybe a thought, an intrusive thought that pops in our mind, that we have, we experience distress in the context of that thought. And right away, we engage in a ritual, which brings us relief. And that's our behavioral model of OCD, right? It's what we would call a negative reinforcement cycle. And the reason that I want to talk about it like this is because we as organisms never do stuff that doesn't make sense, right? All behavior makes sense. in a particular context. So the reason that we do rituals and compulsions in response to scary events is because they work, at least in the short term, right? Now, in the long term, we know that that feeds OCD, right? It feeds and continues it and it maintains it. But that doesn't mean we don't get that little bump of relief initially in the short term. So it's important to notice that, especially if folks are beating themselves up for engaging in rituals, right? So something to understand. So sometimes when we think about rituals, I want us to cast a broader net for other kinds of avoidance behaviors that can also show up in the context of unwanted private events, okay? So we think about these also in terms of function. And so some examples, right, are worry, rumination. Sometimes even if you're doing reassurance to yourself, right? We know that with children and adolescents, reassurance seeking from a parent is a really common ritual, but we can also do that for ourselves, right? Like when I was walking on those narrow paths, telling myself, just look at the ground in front of you, it'll be okay, it'll be okay, it'll be okay, right? That's unhelpful because it protects me from feeling what's going on, and it protects me from noticing everything else that's going on around me that I might learn from, right? Sometimes anxiety doesn't look like anxiety, right? Sometimes it can look like lashing out in anger, pretending everything's okay. I'm fine. I don't have any issues. I'm totally fine. What are you talking about? Right? That's another one, another avoidance strategy. Lots of people engage in trying to control the environment, right? If it's hard to manage the fear inside, I'm going to control my environment. So I'm going to make it as safe as I possibly can so I don't come in contact with this fear. That's another one. Bottling up your feelings, kind of suppressing them or hiding them in some way. So there's a lot of other avoidance behaviors that can also show up in the context of OCD or anxiety. And again, this is short-term pain. It reduces short-term pain and gives you a gain, but it leads to long-time persistence, right, of these avoidance behaviors in the context of anxiety, which really prevent us from learning from them. All right. So when we think about exposure-based treatment, it's based on learning theory, okay? Both classical or respondent and also operant conditioning, right? So let's say I associate, something, a neutral stimulus, some sort of neutral cue with something scary. So let's say I have my little fear monster right here. Very cute. He stays with me. Look at his feet. Adorbs, right? And so to extinguish that, what I would do is I would take whatever it is that's been associated with my little scary guy, and I would present that thing such that, whatever the feared event isn't present. Okay, so we're going to break that pairing. And if I do this over time, right, and I block any sort of avoidance I might engage in, I'm going to learn, and that's going to result in habituation. Okay, so repeated exposure to a cue without the scary thing happening results in habituation. Okay, so that's part of the theory of exposure and response prevention. So the ingredients of ERP are really simple, right? It just involves approaching those things that we've been avoiding, okay, or at the very least, not avoiding them, and resisting engaging in compensatory avoidance behaviors. And that's the operant piece, right? We're going to break that positive or that negative reinforcement cycle. So we're going to reduce the safety-seeking behavior. We're going to reduce the avoidance. Does it work? Well, I sure hope so. And the short answer to that is, sure it does, right? It absolutely does. But the really interesting thing is, turns out it may not work exactly the way that we thought it worked, okay? So I want you to think about how we acquire fears. So let's say there are certain things in the environment that when we experience them, there is no learning required, right? If I get stung by a bee, I'm going to have a really quick pain response, right? I don't need to learn from that. That's just something that happens. So we call that an unconditioned stimulus. But let's say I'm sitting in the waiting room of an office, right? And I get stung by a bee in the office. Let's say one snuck in or something with flowers that were on the table. Well, what happens is I develop sort of an association between that office and that yucky psychological event, or that painful experience that just happened. So me just walking into the office then is going to elicit the experience of fear, right? And that's when that office, just by association in time, one trial learning, becomes this conditioned stimulus that leads to my conditioned response. Now we call that excitatory learning, right? It amps us up, it mobilizes us, and we learn that these things are associated, right? So when people developed, or when the original idea of exposure was developed, wasn't really clear what was going on, but the basic idea was somehow that this association was erased or undone or delinked, right? When you present the waiting room and you go to the waiting room over and over and over again and there are no bees, all of a sudden I'm going to notice that I don't feel so anxious anymore, right? But here's the thing, right? We don't really unlearn. That's not really possible. And there's some data to suggest, that explanation of the situation is not entirely correct, right? It doesn't explain why I might go into a waiting room after a while and all of a sudden feel scared again out of the blue and not really understand why. That's called spontaneous recovery. Or it doesn't explain the rapid reacquisition of fear if this is truly gone, this association. And so we needed a little bit of an adapted model to figure out why not, like how do we explain that? And enter the model of inhibitory learning, which suggests it's not that we erase anything, it's that we develop new learning that somehow competes with the old learning. And that new learning is inhibitory. We just learn that there is no association, right, with this waiting room and this bee. And that competes with the old learning. So if that's the case, right, how do we amp up that inhibitory learning and make it more powerful so it can compete with that original scary learning, right, that we had? So just to kind of summarize, we're relearning, we're developing new associations, right? And we need to make those newer associations more powerful, right? Now, the thing is, with folks with OCD, there may be some reason, there's some data to suggest that it's harder, right, to teach that, right, to strengthen that inhibitory learning enough. So our focus is to really enhance that as we move forward. All right. So I'm going to give you a slightly different way to think about what's our goal then for exposure, given that, right? So this is sort of my little, graphic of how it works. So we have an unwanted private event, a thought, an obsession, feeling. We engage in avoidance, and that gives us relief until it comes again. Then we engage in more avoidance, and that avoidance behavior is reinforced, right? So exposure involves blocking that avoidance, okay? So we're going to have our unwanted private event. We're going to make a space for it. We're not going to have avoidance. But I want you to think about this, because as a good behaviorist, I know it's much easier to teach someone what to do than what not to do, right? So instead of thinking about we're going to stop avoidance, I actually want us to think about it in terms of shaping approach behaviors, okay? Because if we're going to teach new behavior in the presence of an unwanted cue that usually evokes our avoidance, we have much more precision in what we do. And this is how we're going to talk about how to incorporate ACT into ERP. So the goal, the true goal of exposure then becomes not just habituation, which we love. Don't get me wrong. I was so happy to feel less scared of heights when I was on my trek, right? But I want you to think about the treatment target as shaping flexible, adaptive, effective behavior in the presence of OCD or anxiety cues. Okay? Not just stop this. It's how do I learn this whole other repertoire and employ it in this context in which usually I'm going to avoid. All right, stay with me, people. Okay, I wish I could ask if you guys had questions, but I realize I'm not there, so we're just going to have to sit with that uncertainty for a while. Sorry. Right. All right, so point 2, or objective 2, we're going to talk about how do we engage clients and caregivers in rationales for ERP based on this psychological flexibility model. How do we teach that? Well, this is the simple way, right? We're going to teach people how to make a space for their discomfort, their fears, and to choose to engage in things that matter to them anyway, regardless. And this was actually what we used to say at the McLean OCDI Junior when we were staff training. Our milieu staff all used to say, we scare because we care. We do. And I do love that. Okay, so for those of you who are new to ACT, this is a really simple way in. And it's really kind of the model in a nutshell. And what it means really is to accept whatever's going on with you in the moment, all of your experiences, sensations, without defense, right? And to sort of have gentle curiosity about all of that. To connect in with the things that you care about, right? Anxiety and OCD have a really excellent way of derailing us from thinking about the things that truly matter to us in life, right? And the focus becomes very small, just all about the anxiety or the OCD. And so connecting in with your values and then taking action in that direction, right? Towards those values. So to use that example of the mountain trek again, accepting that this is going to be, if I'm going to be in the mountains and I really want to be in the mountains, it's going to come with fear, period. And all sorts of other sorts of physical labor and lack of oxygen and all of that stuff, right? But I had to connect in with the things that really mattered. I had a goal. I had a value, and the value was I wanted to have this experience and share it with my oldest child. And I'm so glad I did, right? And I took action. So it wasn't enough to just think about these things. I had to look over the edge. I had to stop. I had to ask for help when I needed to. I had to choose to move forward instead of freezing, right? So accept, connect, and take action. And really, when we think about this, ACT is all about learning. It's all about learning how to step back from the things that scare you most and choose to move forward into this sort of ambiguous, uncertain, and maybe fear-inducing space outside of your comfort zone so that you can effectively learn from the world, right? And learn how to be effective. And so life does begin really at the end of your comfort zone because that is where we learn. So this is sort of the originally derived ACT model, and it hasn't changed. It's just that now we have greater flexibility and a really lovely developmental model of ACT, which I'll be teaching you today as well, that help us think through what these processes are. So in general, ACT has 6 processes that we're interested in. It has on one side, the mindfulness and acceptance processes. And on the other side, we have the commitment and behavior change processes. And so for those of you who are new to ACT, I will just do kind of a very brief summary of these. But there are many, many books out there that you can kind of look at, right? So the ACT processes, and if I could summarize sort of the goal of ACT, it's really to help you live lives that matter to you, whether or not you're experiencing fear or depression or anger. It's about helping you build your life in whatever context you're in a way that feels really meaningful to you, so you experience abundance and joy, connection, the things that matter the most to you, okay? One of the treatment targets in ACT is what we call psychological flexibility. And it's really exactly the same as what I described as the goal of exposure, right? It's behaving effectively and flexibly regardless of what's going on around you, right? And shifting that behavior when it makes sense to do so, or persisting in it in the service of your values. And your values are the things that you hold most dear. We'll talk more about that as we go through these two kind of chunks of talk. So the 6 components of ACT then that target that, and I think of these as skills that you can learn and you can teach, right? And practice, most importantly, in your lives, whether you're a clinician or whether you're someone with OCD who's just learning this, right? The very first one, and I would argue the most foundational one, is what we call contact with the present moment. And it simply means allowing yourself to, experience the world with your 5 senses right now, right? Making a space for whatever thoughts, feelings, sensations come in is a part of that. And we call that acceptance, right? So it doesn't mean endurance, it doesn't mean tolerating, right? I hear these terms a lot, like, oh, it's about tolerating distress, right? No, it's about welcoming all of your experiences, even those that feel scary or uncomfortable or unwanted, right? And it's about dropping the struggle, dropping the rope, trying to push those away because it just doesn't work so well, right? Diffusion is a term that means stepping back and noticing the thoughts that you're having, noticing the process of your thinking rather than thinking and being in your head, right? And a good way to describe that, if you're not familiar with that term, is just, have you ever been daydreaming and then all of a sudden you're back in the room? It's kind of like that, right? And we do this thousands and thousands of times a day, where we're in our heads and we're just not even aware of what's going on around us. And we're really kind of adhering to whatever the chatter is going on in our heads. And that is, there's nowhere that's more true than in OCD, when people are experiencing really, really frightening recurrent intrusive thoughts that feel like have-tos, right? It's a classic example of being fused, stuck, right, to your thoughts and not really noticing, oh my goodness, I could make other choices than these OCD thoughts would have me do. Okay. Self as context is developing a sense of yourself as stable, right? And it's as a perspective through which all of your thoughts and emotions pass, right? And really noticing that there's this sort of observing part of you that's been there since you were born, right? And that's the same when you were born as it is now, however old you are, right? And it's cultivating this awareness of your mood, emotional state, whatever your struggles are, as impermanent and passing through you, right? The way you would watch clouds in the sky. So that's self as context. We also talk about it a lot now in the more recent literature as perspective taking, right? Taking a perspective on your own experience, right? Flexibly, and also taking the perspectives of others and really noticing who we are with respect to ourselves, with respect to our OCD, with respect to other thoughts and emotions. Okay, so those are our acceptance and mindfulness processes. And on the other side of our model is we have our commitment and behavior change processes. And these are really the engine of ACT, okay? So valuing is the stuff that when it all comes down, you would not give up, right? It's something that's really, really important to you, that gives your life meaning and purpose. And committed action is making a promise to yourself in the service of those values that you will do no matter what, right? So back to our mountain trek example, it was, I got to put one foot in front of the other no matter how tired I am. And trust me, when you're walking for 12 hours a day at 50% oxygen, that's a big ask, really big ask. But that's committed action, right? Am I willing to have this discomfort in the service of having this experience with my oldest child? And the answer was yes. And so 1 foot at a time, 1 foot in front of the other. So you can see why we call that the engine of ACT, quite literally. Okay. So now I'm going to teach you something new. And this is something that even if you have an awareness of ACT, you might not be aware of the newer developmental model that we use when we're teaching adolescents, young adults, children. But we use it with adults too. So I thought it might actually just be nice to show it to you all, because in our use of it, it's such a lovely heuristic that really captures effectively the skills that we're really teaching when we're looking to develop flexible, adaptive repertoires in the presence of fear cues. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how we shape, and what it is it's a way, this model, the DNAV, is a way of taking perspective on your own behavior. Okay, so we'll go through that. So the neat thing about this, and here's the nerd alert. Oops, sorry. I'm realizing you guys can see all these things. So nerd alert here. When I was younger, I was really into the Lord of the Rings. More so than I'd like to admit. But anyway, the DNAV is actually based on evolutionary theory. And if you're not getting the nerdy reference, this is the one ring, right? One ring to bind them all. Yeah, that's what we have here. And so when you think about evolutionary theory, we think about adaptation, we think about retention of particular traits in a species, but we can also apply this to behavior, okay? And even B.F. Skinner, and that's his picture, right? That is not a character in Lord of the Rings, but actually B.F. Skinner, and not Charles Darwin either. We think about we can apply evolution to our own behavior, right? And it works really beautifully, right? So variation, we vary our behaviors in order to learn. We try them out, and we have to see how they work. So they're either selected, okay, reinforced, or they're punished, not selected. And of course, the definition of reinforcement means to strengthen the intensity or strength of a behavior, frequency of a behavior. And punishment does the opposite, it reduces it, okay? So all behavior makes sense, and all behavior has a lawful relationship with the environment, with the contingencies around it. So retention then is we just keep doing stuff that works for us. This is why we engage in compulsions in OCD, isn't it, right? But when we think about this, the purpose of this evolution of behavior is to adapt to our context and survive. And if your mind is thinking, right, that you have this scary thing that you must avoid, of course it's going to engage in avoidance. Why not? So how do we switch that? How do we change that? How do we develop a new set of behaviors that are more effective for us? Okay. So some of these things on this slide are things that we've already discussed. All behavior makes sense. We haven't really talked about context too much, but it's a term you're going to hear a lot as I talk to you. And when we talk about context, we mean a dynamic stream of stuff that influences our behavior. That context can be external, i.e., walking on a ledge, right? Or it can be internal, i.e., oh my gosh, I'm having the thought that I could fall and die and plummet to my death, right? Sorry if that was triggering, but real thought. And context can also be interpersonal, right? The context of the therapeutic relationship with your therapist, the context of, your relationships with other people in your life. It can be intrapersonal, your relationship with yourself, right? Your relationship with your OCD, and it can be situational. And as we mentioned ad nauseum already, all behavior is an adaptation to a specific context. Now, here's the thing. If we change the context, we can change the behavior. And that's where we're going to go. Okay. So how might we think about shaping the perspective from the DNAV? So the first thing I should probably do is explain a little bit about how we think about the DNAV. Okay. So our advisor is the part of us that gives us advice. It's sort of our verbal knowing. It's our mind. Lots of times when we're working with folks with OCD, this is where the OCD sits. Okay. It's that part of us that is it evaluates everything, it judges, and the function of it really is it's a threat detector. It keeps us safe, okay? And here's the thing, we're an apex predator, humans, and we don't run very fast. We don't have very sharp teeth or claws, and yet we're the top of the food chain, and we've given up our sort of sharp and pointy bits for this incredible cerebral cortex that we have that allows us to think abstractly, to plan ahead, to come up with ideas that allow us to collaborate with groups, to innovate, all of these really neat things. And that's the verbal part of us. Now, as a threat detector, you got to think about what would the properties be of an effective threat detector, right? Should you be able to just turn it off whenever you feel like it? Like imagine you had a fire alarm and you're like, yeah, I'm going to turn it off tonight. Would that be effective? No, it wouldn't, right? Because what if there was a fire at night? So the thing with our advisor is it's always on, right? You can't turn it off. And so this is why thought suppression tends to be not so effective, right? So what do you do if you feel stuck in your advisor perspective and you're kind of listening to this sort of threat detector tossing scary thoughts at you or negatively evaluating you or your performance or judging or trying to get you to avoid something that's scary or escape from it? Well, we can't turn it off, but we can always shift our perspective. And so the next perspective we can take on our experience is called our noticer, right? It's our noticing space. And it's really simply how we take in information from the world with our five senses, right? It's that piece that we kind of contact in self as context from the original ACT model, that present moment awareness space where we're open to learning and we're taking in information and we're stepped back. We might be noticing what the advisor is saying, but we're here noticing the advisor as separate, right? So how do we innovate? How do we try new things? For that, we need to shift to a third perspective, and that is our discoverer, right? This is how we engage in novel behavior, and this is where that variability in behavior comes in. And then we feed it through the rest of this model. We notice how it works in the environment, and then we problem solve using our advisor to figure out, well, that wasn't such a great idea, or maybe that was a really good idea and you should try it again, but this way, right? So discovery space is outside of our comfort zone, doing stuff we're not really sure is going to happen. And this is where ERP lives, right? Because that's what ERP is. It's doing stuff that feels really scary, uncertain outcome, don't know what's going to happen, advisors saying it's going to be terrible, oh my gosh, don't go there. Noticer, if it's engaged, is noticing all the experience of fear, noticing sort of like the expectancy violation that might be happening or not, right? And all of that. Now, why do we shift perspectives? Well, for that, we need to shift one more time into our values perspective, right? And touch upon what's the purpose, right, of what we're doing here, right? Like for me on the track, it was, I want to remember this experience and have this experience now with my child, right? My oldest. And I had to shift from, oh my gosh, this is really scary, you could fall off the mountain, my advisor talking, me noticing all of the fear, and then shift into discovery. Like, I wonder what would happen if I actually like looked over the edge, right? In the service of being in that experience, right? So you can see how it's really simple. It's a really simple model. And just having used it many, many times, we have groups, programs built on this and built around this. It's just a lovely heuristic to teach folks how to shift into increasing the variability in their behavior, right? Because the ACT, one of the things that's sort of emblematic of an ACT model of psychopathology is engagement in a rigid, inflexible pattern of behavior, right? And that's also emblematic of OCD, isn't it? I have a scary thought, I have to do a ritual. Scary thought, ritual. Doesn't change, right? The shape of the rituals may change and the kinds of thoughts may change, but the pattern does not. And it is really tough, isn't it? Very rigid. So this model then is to increase variability and flexibility in behavior in the service of one's values. And you'll notice that we have a little white circle around our DNAV, and it says self-context, social context, right? And we want to think about all of this occurring in the context of ourself. What's our relationship to ourself? But also how is our behavior impacting those around us, right? So how does our behavior impact us? And how does it impact those around us? So to summarize, the DNAV then teaches increasing variability through engaging in discovery. So you can start to hear and think about like, that's kind of a neat rationale for exposure. If the goal of exposure is really to teach effective, flexible, adaptive behavior, good way to do it, right? It's going to increase the variability of our ways of responding. So think about this. We have a child, for example, who has social anxiety. And let's say they go ahead and they are on the playground and they're contacting the physical world and they want to run away and they want to not look at anybody in the eyes and they don't want to talk to anyone because that's really scary. But they stay anyway and they think, I'm going to move into this discovery mode. I'm going to make eye contact. I'm going to say hello. Oh my goodness, let's see what happens. And so once that child's in that situation, he's going to come in contact with reinforcers, naturally occurring reinforcers that are going to shape his behavior. Maybe kids are nice. Maybe somebody says hi back. Maybe that other kid doesn't. And so maybe we don't talk to that kid, or maybe we try a different way of talking to that kid. So he starts to vary his behavior, and some of that's going to be reinforced. And the things that are reinforced are going to continue, and he's going to keep doing that. So what you're hearing here is something that is shut down in OCD if we just listen to the OCD, right? And we just engage in rituals. We're looking at trial and error learning, right? OCD wants folks to completely avoid any experiences that might lead to harm or anxiety or fear or uncertainty or whatever the flavor of OCD is. And it really prevents people from being able to be in the world and learn from it in a real, vital way. this model, right, and this kind of ACT perspective is about teaching exposure like that, right? How do we get you in the world and get you trying new stuff? So this is pretty much what I said or described earlier, that when we are teaching the DNAV, right, in the context of exposure, we're teaching 3 functional classes of behavior, 3 behaviors, okay? And the compass of the DNAV is, of course, your values, right, the stuff that matters to you. But our advisor, the functional class of behavior, is it's our predictions, our mind, our self-talk, and it's how we relate to the world in the absence of any direct experience, right? So if OCD is like, don't touch that, it's contaminated, and we're kind of stuck in OCD, we might be like, okay, I'm not touching that, contaminated, I'm going to wash my hands right now. No contact with the world, just with the advisor, right? So the noticer is connection then with your feelings, with your body. It's awareness of all of those things. And then your discoverer is behaviors related to exploring and testing the world, trying stuff out. It's where we start to vary behaviors. So the goal then is teaching someone to discriminate between these 3 perspectives and then help them shift their awareness across them when it's helpful in context. And that is immediately applicable, right, to ERP. Okay. So, as we mentioned before, you can't understand behavior outside of its context, okay? So we think about the context of yourself, right? So it's the ability to see yourself across different contexts, discriminating you versus your OCD, for example, or you as an observer and you as an actor. And then the social view is the ability to really notice the effect of your behavior on others, but it also involves taking the perspective of others, right? Which I think is really important and useful in the case of OCD, with significant others, with parents, with caregivers, right, who might be pulled in, right, to accommodate those rituals. And it's also hard, sometimes when people are struggling with OCD, to really see and understand the impact that engagement in rituals can have on the people around us, right? That's really hard, okay? So the self view and the social view, this awareness of these 2 sort of perspectives, arises from practicing using the DNAV, noticing when you're stuck in your head, listening to your advisor, noticing when you're noticing how you're feeling, right? And noticing when you're shifting into discovery and trying new things, right? Like engaging in exposures and response prevention. So you can also apply the DNAV as an assessment, right? To think through, like, well, if this is really a skills building model, right? Then what sorts of deficits might we see? How might we think about OCD from this perspective, right? And here are some things that are important that I'll just put out there, sort of questions to consider. If you're stuck, if your client is stuck, or if you are stuck yourself, engaging in rituals, right, as a way to manage fear, are you in touch with those things that you really care about? Or has life become this very narrow cycle between fear, ritual, discomfort, ritual, and just trying to organize life to prevent that being triggered as much as possible, right? And if you are in touch with the things that you care about, are you actually taking action to that end, right? So for me on the trek at first, before I realized that I was white knuckling, kind of on the face of it, I was doing it, kind of, sort of, right? I was going on the walk, wasn't I? But I wasn't really on the walk. I was stuck in my advisor, trying to avoid noticing, definitely trying to avoid discovery, right? It was all about trying to manage fear. And imagine, I would have missed everything had I done that. So that's one deficit you can look for as you're talking to your folks, right? In terms of the advisor, thinking about, are you stuck? Kind of listening to these OCD thoughts, right? Do they feel like have tos? And are you resisting at all? Or are you just giving in? Okay. That would be a skills deficit in not really being able to step back from the advisor, and certainly not using the advisor effectively. Because don't get me wrong, the advisor sometimes gets a bad rap, right? Because it's pretty negative as your threat detector. It's going to be risk averse on purpose. But here's the thing, sometimes we really need that, right? Sometimes we don't. And so learning to discriminate when is it useful and when is it not useful is part of the skill in using the advisor. So we look for, how does that attachment to the advisor serve people? So that's one way to think of this, right? So as you're thinking about making a rationale to engage in ERP, you want to be thinking about, you can think about some of these things too. Like, how is that playing a role? And what if we created a little space there to step back from our advisor and kind of notice, like, what if we tried something different? What if we stepped into uncertainty? What if we, like, Jonathan Grayson pulled that gum off the underneath side of that bridge and chewed it just to see what happened, right? That would be more noticing and discovery. Okay. So one thing that I notice a lot when I'm anxious, and I notice it a lot in my clients when they're anxious or when they're struggling with sort of an intrusive thought, is that they're not really aware of what they're feeling. And they're certainly not aware of their five senses experience, but a lot of times they're not really in contact with what they're feeling. It's just this very kind of narrow description of, I'm really, really anxious, I'm really triggered. Or I'm a little less triggered, or I'm more triggered. And it's this kind of very, thin, narrow description of one's emotional experience, right? And so that's a deficit in noticing, because here's the thing, right? Had I stayed, just continuing on with this example of the track, right? All I would have noticed was this little patch of dirt in front of my feet and the feeling of fear if I had kept going the way I was going. That's it. I wouldn't have noticed how incredibly breathtaking the mountains were. The smell of, cedar that's burning, like that there were giant rhododendrons all over. The color of, this incredible aquamarine blue water. And I wouldn't have noticed sort of what it was like to hang out with these cool people that I'm walking with, and how proud I am of my child, and that I'm also terrified of edges, and that also my heart is beating really fast, and also that I'm scared I might fall, right? So what you see when you have skillful use of noticing, which is, I think, absolutely critical to doing solid, really, really effective ERP, it's allowing your experience as it is and noticing it. It's staying in contact with it and not protecting yourself, right? So that's one place where if we're just not allowing that, if we're not curious about our experience, that's a deficit in noticing. That's actually going to make exposures less effective, because that's really white knuckling, isn't it? Defending yourself against noticing what it's like while you're doing this. And then deficits in discovery. Do you try new things? No, that's a deficit, right? Like, sometimes it's not important to try new things. OCD is not one of those times. It's a great time to try things differently than your OCD is telling you, right? And this is where we start to flex up our behavior. And so I start to think about, like, in the context of OCD, right? Where's their flexibility, right? Even flexibility in what we attend to, right? If we have a session and all we talk about is OCD, but not what we care about, or not that cool exposure that you tried, or, whatever, that might be a deficit in discovery. And so we want to kind of move people from this narrow, rigid repertoire into something that's much more flexible. Okay, so hopefully this will work. This is a video that if you've seen me talk before, you may have seen it, but maybe not. And this is a young man named Ethan, who we've known for many years, who willingly gives us access to use this video to teach, because he is someone who really he learned his ERP so well. And what's so interesting about Ethan is that he really learned it this way that we teach it, right? And I'm going to play this video for you, and I'd love you to listen to what he's saying. And the first half is kind of his stuckness, and he was one of the most severe kids we've seen. And I want you to really listen to how he describes how he got better. And then we'll talk through it from the psychological flexibility perspective, okay? And that hopefully will give you some language to help engage folks, or if you have OCD yourself, to think through how you might approach your own exposures. Okay, fingers crossed this will work. We're gonna see. All right, here we go.
Okay. So, I don't know, I guess when I came here, the biggest difference compared to like things I've done, like things I did in Denver and things I did in Amy, would probably be the concept of white knuckling is a really important key, and you guys may not know this.
Okay, I misspoke there. So I have two Ethan videos, and this is the second one. So what this one is also very important is he talks about his experience doing exposure in a traditional way, and then he talks about doing it the way we taught it, using this perspective. So have fun. At least we know the video works, so here we go.
That is, but when Lisa and I first talked about it, the analogy I ended up coming up with was, well, it was help aided by Lisa, but basically, if you have a fear of roller coasters and someone is going to make you go on a roller coaster, so you know you have to go on this roller coaster, you have a conscious decision you can make. You can go for the natural response, which is to get on the roller coaster and be like, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here, and like shut your eyes, clench your teeth, and like be miserable throughout the entire roller coaster. Don't take in your surroundings, don't do this, just wait until it's over. Be like, okay, I'm doing this, but I want it to be over. And then the difference is, what is kind of taught here is, instead, as you step onto that roller coaster, saying, okay, I hate roller coasters, these scare me to death, but I'm going to do this anyway, so I think I'm going to try to see this from the perspective of people who enjoy it. I'm going to keep my eyes open and feel the roller coaster for what it is. Like, the roller coaster, I don't know, instead of shutting yourself out and waiting till it's over, feeling everything the roller coaster has to offer, and if you don't like it, you don't like it. Maybe you have some newfound love for roller coasters, but that's a big difference. That's kind of different. Like at other programs, they'll have you do these tough exposures that make you really they make you uncomfortable, and they like have you not do like a ritual or something to calm yourself down. But you could still just be waiting for the time when this is over. When the exposure's over, you could do a ritual, or you could, like, you're really avoiding it. You're not really going in and thinking about, why does this make me anxious? What do I really not like about this? And am I willing to see what would happen if I just did it anyway? And I personally, and I'm weird, I personally see it as a little bit of an adventure every time you do that. It's like, you take, it's doing something that you're really scared of, and you honestly don't know what's going to happen. My OCD says one terrible thing's going to happen, and my rational brain of everything I've learned says nothing's going to happen. I'm just touching a piece of soap. But I, being like basically the unjudgmental, like, I don't actually know what's going to happen. I'm separating myself from either of these things, and I'm just going to be like, well, let's just do it and find out. And so that's kind of where you end up wanting to do the exposure. Is something else that I think came in here that's interesting is like, I ended up wanting to do more exposures because it was like, you know, it's, I don't know, it's something new. It's something like, and, you know, it gives you really something they say is just you lean into it. Like, and I found myself like after I did a hard exposure, like one time, I don't know, I had an exposure that I was doing and I knew it was going to be kind of difficult, but I ended up like, you know, I accidentally dropped this bar of soap on the floor where a bunch of other people had been. And I kind of, at that moment, like this was already a kind of difficult exposure, I decided to just go for it. And so I like picked up the soap without like washing the soap off or like scratching it off, just rubbed it all over my body and all this stuff. And I came out after I was done with my shower and I sat down and I didn't really talk to anyone for a while. What I ended up doing, like, I kind of just sat there and, to put it simply, kind of like poked at my anxiety. Like, what do you have to offer me? Like, I was already scared and uncomfortable. And so then I, like, instead of doing a ritual or like kind of waiting until that goes away, I kind of pushed it until it had nothing more to give me, like until it really couldn't really make me anxious. And I just kind of, instead of like getting tensed up from all of that, instead just kind of let it wash over me. And like, I don't know, it's hard to describe, honestly, but like kind of going into it and wanting to go into it. So yeah. Although now I feel the pressure of the video. Okay, I can talk about more later.
Okay. So I love that video, and I am so grateful to Ethan for letting us use it all the time, because what it's a beautiful illustration of is exactly what I'm talking about. It's not just approaching the thing and resisting the ritual. Think about all of the things he talked about. Not only did he approach, he goes for it, he gets curious about it, he pokes at his anxiety to see, ooh, what do you got? What can you give me? You know, can you teach me anything new? Right? And what really I love about this is that he really did go through this experience where he started with not letting himself do a ritual. But the massive shift came with, I want to do more ERP. I'm excited. I want to explore, right? And if I could teach everybody with OCD that one piece, I think we would be doing really well as a field, right? If we could teach that. And so for me, incorporating some of these ACT tools and principles and skills building into traditional ERP gives us slightly more precision in how we teach that. It gives us a bigger bag of tools where the oars are pulling in the same direction, but it gives us more opportunities to teach that. Okay. And so I just, thank you, Ethan. We will move on from there. Or not. Yes, we will. Okay. So I'll shift you guys over to here now. So a lot of you are probably asking, well, like, you know, I'm happy with ERP as it is. I just do ERP. So what's the big deal? When and why would I use ACT to enhance my treatment? Well, here are some situations where you might want to consider it. And you might, you know, if you find yourself as a clinician getting stuck, or if you find yourself as an individual who has OCD getting stuck, you might want to think about teaching some of these things when folks are unwilling, right, to experience or approach anxiety. And we saw many, 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 many kids and teens who felt like that at the OCDI, and indeed, you know, that come to our practice. When folks are right on the verge of doing an exposure and they have a thought, it's too hard, I'm not ready, right? ACT is great for helping you notice those as thoughts and moving forward anyway. When you feel like it's too overwhelming, sometimes people can do ERP as a control strategy, right? If we think functionally, right? And I'll give you an example of that. Many years ago, I was doing a consult with another clinician who had a young woman who had some really significant harm thoughts. And the clinician came to me because she said, this person is they're doing ERP. They're doing it like they're so compliant. They're doing everything I ask, and they are just absolutely not getting any better. What is the deal? I don't know what's happening. And my advice was, stop doing ERP. Just stop. She said, why? And I said, my guess is that the ERP is being done to make sure the harm doesn't happen. She went ahead, she tried it, and sure enough, that was it. It was like this kind of co-opting. OCD is really good at co-opting anything to become a control strategy, to become a ritual. And that's one of the reasons that it's really important to me to teach it from a behavioral analytic viewpoint, because if you miss that, you could be spinning your wheels as a practitioner and getting really confused about how come it's not working for this particular person. So thinking about that, look for covert white knuckling. ACT is super helpful if we consider cognitive rituals as behaviors that one does, right? So we think about using it it's very helpful with more ruminative OCD, that's especially. And then if there's really rigid attachment to OCD rules where you're not having a lot of insight about how this is functioning without really tracking your actual experience of that. These are all times when you might want to consider using some of these ACT elements. And so specifically, what might you do that for? What could ACT add, right? How can it help? Well, one of the things that it's very useful for, right, because this is built into it as an intervention, is really motivating willingness to explore these things that we think are aversive. And you heard that in Ethan talking about it, that curiosity that I want to find out what happens. It can also help with motivation by really placing ERP in the service of one's values, right? Am I willing to feel uncomfortable if it means this is a huge step towards this life I want to build for myself? Yeah, maybe. And that might be more motivating than, hey, I get to be less anxious or habituate, right? Language matters. How we think about these things matters. And I think ACT is also really great at supporting self-direction and choice instead of self-coercion or making yourself do exposures. And you heard that too in how Ethan talked about the roller coaster, right? He talked about how would the experience be different if I was made to do it versus I took a deep breath and I chose to move forward, right? And I think that those elements are really important. And I think that when folks really engage in facing fears with those things in mind, it can really empower OCD. So how might ACT enhance inhibitory learning also in exposure, right? Well, I often ask this question, right? So if you were scared of spiders and I tossed a giant spider in your room, where would your attention be? It would be on the spider, period. And the reason it would be on the spider was because you had to keep an eye on it in order to make sure it didn't get you. It didn't crawl up your leg or bite you, right? Or whatever spider's going to do. I don't love spiders either, so welcome to the exposure with me. And we do the same thing when we have thoughts that we don't want oh my gosh, I can't have that thought. Where's that thought? Am I having the thought? Oh no, right? And so just like the spider, the scope of your attention is super narrow and it's just on that threat cue. So if there's a spider in your office or in your room, wherever you are, you're not going to be able to tell me what color the wallpaper is, or if that flower over there smells great, or whether, you're seeing beautiful light outside the window, or there's some art, or you're comfortable in your chair. You're noticing the spider, period. And so if we focus and if we teach how to be in your bodies during exposure, how to be aware in your noticer, or present in this moment, or accepting, right? We are making greater opportunities for you to learn from that experience that would not have been there if you're just kind of like, am I anxious? Right? So it enhances the opportunity for expectancy violation. And I will talk about inhibitory learning in a little bit, expectancy violation just simply means noticing what actually happens and how that's different from what you expected in your mind or your advisor to happen. Okay? So broad, flexible, purposeful attention to what's going on. I'm going to poke my anxiety and see what it can give me. That's what we're after. Okay? It can undermine control strategies and adherence to verbal rules, right? When a behavior becomes rule governed, it becomes less sensitive to contingencies in the environment because we're just focused on a rule, like an OCD rule. You can think of an obsession as a rule, right? I might get contaminated. Therefore, I have to go and I have to decontaminate in some way. And that's really important, right? That's our advisor talking. The advisor is the seed of our verbal rules. And so ACT, because it has this diffusion piece that helps you step back from that, right? It's got this, building perspective, right? To shift from your advisor to your noticer and notice how those rules are working and how pushy they are and that you don't have to actually follow them, right? That undermines your adherence to them. So that's a lovely piece of ACT. And this, of course, helps you learn from your environment by helping you really notice what's actually happening. And we call that tracking, right? When you're learning from direct contingencies in the world rather than indirectly based on what you think is happening, which we call pliance. Okay. Now, the simple way we talk about this, and this is sort of a nice way to give a rationale for exposure, no matter who you're working with, is we really want to shape a few things. We want to shape curiosity about your experience. We want to shape your willingness to allow previously avoided experiences, psychological events, private events, those things. And we want to promote variability or flexibility in your behavior, right? So we would shape curiosity by teaching mindfulness, by teaching you how to be present, by teaching you how to detach from your thoughts or your advisor, to really accept or appreciate or notice all that's going on in the present moment. We might increase your willingness by undermining your control strategies, undermining like the notion that you can actually manage your anxiety, which you really can't. I mean, maybe in the short bursts, right? With a ritual, but we don't want to go that route, do we? And we can also shape your willingness to do hard things by placing your exposure in this much broader, much more valued, much more important and motivating context. And then finally, we can shape flexibility by moving you into discovery, into your discoverer zone, right? So you can practice behavior and vary your behavior and learn from it and see how it works in the environments, whether those environments are external to you or they're internal. More on that later. Okay. So when we integrate ACT or DNAV processes and exposures, these are the skills we're really teaching. Okay, and this is sort of just a summary of what we've said. Okay. All right. And so I think we are going to stop there now, and we will pick this up next time. But on the next day, or in the next block of our training, we're going to talk about how do we develop a relationship with our client that's founded in these principles, and how do we really use that to empower that client moving forward and doing hard things. So I will see you guys in a little bit. I am going to stop my share. I hope that was useful to you. I know that I'm going to be in a panel at some point today, so you guys can ask any questions that you have. But thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. It's really valuable to me, and I really hope this is useful to you as well. Take care. Bye.
Welcome, Dr. Coyne. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Dr. Diebler. So nice to see you.
Good to see you. So somehow we wound up on time anyway, despite our little
That's awesome.
audio delay. So thank you everybody for being patient with our audio problems in the beginning, and I'm glad that we're able to get it going and to welcome you to the live Q&A portion. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat, in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And for the next 15 minutes or so, we'll talk to Dr. Coyne about her presentation thus far. So we have a few already. Let's take a look at what we have here. Someone wants to ask about a client. She asks, I'm working with a client who has fears around driving, especially getting lost or having someone honk at her. I'd love to hear some ideas about linking to values. Her identified big values are mostly around relationships. Driving to the grocery store doesn't offer the same obvious context, appreciation as climbing Mount Everest.
That's funny. You know, when I was little, my mom had anxiety, and she continued to have anxiety when I was a young adult. And it was really interesting because I didn't really realize what was going on, but she was never willing to come and visit me when I moved to a new place. And I thought, wow, why is she not coming to visit me? I'm so sad about that, you know? And I didn't realize it was because of this rigidity, and she had to go only to the same places. And so one of the things I would wonder about is, you know, I would think about what are all the things you can't do because you don't drive? What's harder because you don't drive? What would it be like to just, you know, be able to just jump in a car on a whim and go bring a sick friend, you know, a care package or a care basket? So if it were me, I would think about, you know, what does not driving take from you? What are places you want to go? What are places you want to see? What would it be like to just go out and try that new coffee place when COVID's over? Knock wood that it's over soon. You know, and I think I would do some imaginal work around that. And I would think about what's the cost of not driving? And I would look for sadness. I would look for boredom. I would look for feeling stuck to a routine, because those are all places where a value might be underneath that you could plumb.
So another attendee asks, can you elaborate more on using ACT when ERP is being used as a control strategy? For example, the consult with harm OCD thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of lost me there, but I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So, well, what I told the clinician to do when we figured this out was I said, stop doing ERP and see what happens. And she said, what? That's the evidence-based treatment. I said, yeah, but OCD's co-opted it. And you have to think functionally. So I think rather than thinking about ACT, I think about, you know, functional analysis and applied behavior analysis and the function of behavior, right? So that's the first thing, to kind of look at what's the function of what is someone's doing. You know, and you see this in perfectionism, for example, right? I want to do treatment perfectly. Or I have to please the therapist, right? Because we all like to be liked. None of us are immune. And so thinking really carefully about what purpose is this serving, your client or you, if you have OCD or perfectionism. And by the way, I just finished reviewing, or I'm reading a new book on perfectionism by Jennifer Kemp. It's brilliant. So it's not published yet, but very excited about it. So I would start there. And then the next thing I would do is I would go back to present moment awareness, because what you really want to do is teach your client to be able to determine the function of their own behavior in the moment. It's one thing if you get it, but it's a totally other thing if you can help your client really catch themselves avoiding. And if they are, then you want to move them into allowing, right? Really allowing whatever thoughts and feelings are there, relaxing their body, not to relax, but this is one of the behaviors we do when we're anxious. We tense up. What is it like to experience anxiety and fear and scary thoughts and not try to control your body even? So I would move into acceptance in that way.
And you're alluding to kind of dancing around that hexaflex. For people who are less familiar with ACT, can you talk a little bit about the differences between the different ACT concepts and how
Sure.
dance around that hexaflex when people get stuck?
Yeah, absolutely. I always start with what's going on with the client in the room, right? And if somebody's really in their head and they're giving me all sorts of reasons why ERP won't work or this is too hard, I know we're fused, right? Fusion is experiencing thoughts as literal truths, and it's acting as though those thoughts are literal truths. So I'm going to move into present moment awareness, and I'm going to start discriminating between, are you in your head or are you here now noticing? Once we're in present moment awareness, we can engage acceptance and willingness, right? Allowing those things in your experience. So I might slow someone down. Self as context is a fun one. That's taking the way that we think about it now, the simplest way, I suppose, not that it's simple, is to take a perspective on yourself and take a perspective on your behavior. And so a good place that I might use that in ERP is if I have a client who is really struggling with taking this next step, right? And you can do this with yourself too, think about what would future you who kicked OCD's butt do right now? What would they tell you, right? And then I had a client who taught me this one. I love this one. He said, I kind of feel like my OCD is like a little kid who's really scared, hiding behind a chair, waiting for someone to lead him out and teach him how not to be afraid. That's a way you can kind of use self as context. And the behavior is simply noticing yourself in time. It's noticing I am here now, I am there then, and using your imagination to really engage willingness and motivation to do stuff. If somebody's really sort of languishing and they don't feel like it's motivated to do exposure, I might move into values. If somebody's having issues with a treatment interfering behavior, I might move into committed action and talk about making a promise to yourself to move forward. What am I forgetting? I think we did all of them. I think that was all 6, Marla.
Excellent.
There you go.
So someone has a question. What are some of your favorite ACT exercises and metaphors that you find helpful in helping clients to understand shifting perspectives, specifically in the DNAV model?
Oh my goodness, my favorite metaphor. There's so many, and I really like to take things that the client says and use them as metaphors. But I think that one of my favorites we're actually going to do in the second talk. It's one of the I do 2 exercises in the part of the afternoon, and I don't want to let it out of the bag, but trust me, it's nice. I like it. And I hope you guys really like it. I think I talked about it. I'm not sure we do it, but we might actually. No, I think we do it. There's a fun here's a fun one for teens. When we are teaching the DNAV, there's an exercise by Louise Hayes, who is one of the founders or the developers of that DNAV model, where this is great with groups, where we have one person, you need a whole bunch of people to do this. And so I've done this in workshops too. It's too bad I would have done this for you live. One person is a person. Then you need the 4 perspectives. You need 4 more people who are the perspectives: advisor, discoverer, noticer, value. And then everyone else in the audience are lions, the field of lions. So you have the person in the front of the room. You have the value all the way at the back of the room, beckoning to the person to come to them. And then you say to the person, well, you got to get through this field full of lions that are going to try and eat you, but you can only take one person with you. Who do you want to take? The advisor, the noticer, and the discoverer. And the kids act out each part. So if it's the advisor, they're like, don't bother. You can't make it. You'll get killed, right? And you don't get anywhere. So that doesn't work. Then you have the noticer that just notices, but doesn't give you any problem solving. So it's like, there is a lion. It is really large. It is growling. You are walking. It's great for noticing, but it doesn't give you what you need to get through. And then the discoverer is like, woo, values, let's go, woo. It's like, so that's like a death trap. So the point of this is, the trick of that model is you got to figure out how to use the perspectives flexibly and effectively to move towards your value. And the kids came up with really funny things. Like one was like noticing the lions while the advisor was like, toss some food over in that direction. So the lions are distracted and the discoverer's like, run right through. And so it was just a fun game, but you can use it so playfully, especially with young people. And I know there's a great podcast that just came out with Ricky Kierkegaard and Louise Hayes. And in that podcast, she said she's just finished a first draft of a book for adults for the DNAB. So I wanted to add that.
That's exciting.
Mm.
Looking forward to that. Let's take a question from a different segment of the community. Someone asks, my 12-year-old son developed OCD during COVID. It's hard to make him understand what he's missing out because of all of his unusual activities being canceled. What's your advice?
Yeah, it's really tough. And my advice for that would be to be gentle and empathic, and also take a look at, this is not an ACT book, but Ellie Lebowitz has a wonderful book for parents of kids who are not quite aware of how their behavior is affecting other people. And I have it somewhere. Here it is. Maybe he's watching, but Ellie, I'm giving your book yet another plug. This is a great book. So I would try with that. And then one of the things that's really, really important as a parent is to model. So very often, whether or not we have anxiety or OCD in big amounts, culturally, we're taught to avoid those things, right? To avoid negative emotions and things like that. And when our kids are feeling them, you feel like your job is to help them not be anxious. Okay. And that's a really good idea if there's really a danger, right? That's called protective parenting. But, one of the things we want to think about is anxiety is a part of life. Marla, can you type that in the thing? Okay. So anxiety is a part of life. And so rather than kind of wrapping the kids up in bubble wrap, our job as parents is to teach them how to handle it flexibly, effectively, right? All emotions are information. That's all. And sometimes that information is useful, like when there's really a lion, and sometimes it's not, when we have kind of a thought lion, like OCD.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm going to put the link to Ellie Leibowitz's book in the chat for everyone, so you can click on it and buy it if you like. It's a great book specifically
It really is.
And for those of you who aren't space trained, the clinicians, highly recommend it. Actually, Dr. Coyne and I always wind up for some reason at the same in-person training.
It's really funny.
We were at the space training together at Yale, and then also the Louise Hayes training in North Jersey.
That's right.
So there she is
What
again.
was really funny was I accidentally booked myself to his training today for RFID. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't go.
I was very close to that until I realized I had to be here.
Right. So we would have ended up at that one too.
He says that he is going to hold more dates, so to
Yeah.
be determined. All right, let's take another question. Someone says, I have a client who thinks that if he feels pressure, enjoys a good sandwich, or enjoys time with family, then something bad will happen, which he always finds evidence for. Can you talk about how to treat this?
Yeah. And I think that that's an acceptance one, isn't it? Right. You know, there's the usual sort of testing hypotheses, but it sounds like he's always going to find, right? His mind is very active and it's always spinning a story about how he's always going to find that something bad happens. And so I think I would work on what can I do to engender his motivation to lean into this and willingness to kind of play with this, right? You know, there might be a diffusion piece there, kind of depending on the believability of those thoughts that he's having. Because, you know, part of him, I'm sure, might be aware that this doesn't sound real, but maybe it is. And the doubt is enough. So I would also think about, you know, lots of times when we have something like that, you want to focus in on the intolerance of uncertainty, right? The doubt, but it might, right? Those kinds of pieces I think are very, very important. And so just, you might even do some present moment awareness work around what does it feel like to be uncertain? And, you know, see if he can develop some acceptance of that feeling or some curiosity about that feeling as he moves forward. And then see if you can move him into small exposures. You can do a hierarchy starting with big willingness items. And, you know, thinking through again, what pieces, what is getting in the way of him moving forward? How do we motivate him with a value? And how do we undermine sort of his attempts to control, right?
And I think we have time for one more question here. Someone says, how can I use ACT to really identify that what I'm experiencing is OCD? I often, with scrupulosity, can't seem to really see it as OCD.
Yeah, I have a little bit of that myself, truth be told. And it runs in our family, anxiety and stripes of OCD as well. And so I would say, if you are engaged in trying to figure it out and you feel consumed by that, and there's an urgency, I want you to kind of see if you can pause on that and notice what shows up. And if you start to feel deeply uncomfortable and doubtful and like that urgency pops up, right? It's probably OCD, right? And you've just figured out what's the function of all of that, figuring it out. Okay. So whether or not it is OCD or not, think about, is this how you want to be spending your time? What else would you prefer to be doing? And what would it mean to stop trying to figure it out and lean into some of those activities or relationships that really matter to you?
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, we did have some questions we didn't get a chance to get to, but perhaps we can address those later or in the chat.
Sure.
We're going to take a break, and everyone can stretch a little bit, use the restroom, grab some lunch, and we'll reconvene for session 2 starting at 12:30. And please, when you log on for session 2, remember that there's a session 2 link. It's a separate link from this link. So everybody enjoy your break, and we'll see you in a half an hour.
Great. We'll see you guys in a little while. Bye.